Hey, everybody. Welcome into Browns post-game coverage of their 21-14 defeat to the Cincinnati Bengals. They are now 1-6. It's week 7, and the season is over. I think, obviously, we got to start with the quarterback situation. There's a lot of things that happened in today's game. We will try and get to all of them, but off the top, obviously, we got to talk about what happened to Deshaun Watson. The end of the first half, Jake, he's putting together a decent drive, hit a few intermediate throws, was not dumping the ball off at every opportunity, looking a little bit more comfortable in the offense, and it looked like it was a designed quarterback run. He plants to accelerate out of the shotgun, and the Achilles goes. And it's one of those injuries. There's not many injuries in football that everybody on their couch, no matter how many beers in you are, you can say that's an Achilles. But that's the injury that everybody can kind of diagnose. It was obvious right away what happened, obviously. It was an ugly scene. After that, as the cart comes out and everybody's gathered around and Watson's carted off, and then it's Dorian Thompson-Robinson time all of a sudden, because for the first time this season, Jameis Winston wasn't the backup quarterback. So I think, Jake, we have been held hostage to a certain extent by this season where nothing has changed. And then in one game, we got to see all three quarterbacks. So I'm just curious, from your perspective, what was it like feeling like it's the same formula? This is the Browns, how they've lost every week, and then all of a sudden everything's different.
Yeah, I think the way we should probably attack this is, ironically enough, the elephant in the room with the organization has been Watson, and they've ignored it. I think the thing you should discuss, or we should try to really quickly hit on, is like the fans' reaction to him getting hurt, right? I think that, like your point, Andrew, it's a pretty obvious injury. I only time I recall somebody having that sort of visual pop was the Jordan Love thing early in the year, but it was like sort of like, I guess he's made out of rubber bands or something. He was able to come back. I feel like this was more obvious. Like Kevin Durant is the one that comes to mind, where you make that plant and you're up on your toe and you're trying to press off the toe, and that reverberation up into the calf happens. So yeah, I mean, it's really hard to envision he's not going to be dealing with a ruptured Achilles, which, there's a bigger discussion we'll have in the coming week about the duration of which, the ruptured Achilles stuff lasts. Is he coming back mid-season next year? Like, there's a whole bunch of stuff to dig into at that duration of injury, because kind of Kirk Cousins is ironically playing this year the model for coming back off of this thing in a time frame that's pretty similar. But what I think I want to say, this is imperative that I think everybody has an opinion on this, and that's okay. Like, I don't think it makes, like, if you were somebody who felt like this injury was maybe like justified or whatever, like, way this is, I don't really think this makes you a terrible person. And I know that everybody's going to disagree with different ways of thinking about this. I don't find myself in any way, shape, or form ever rooting for somebody to get hurt. And when Watson was down, the last kind of thing going through my mind was like, oh yeah, he's hurt. That's awesome. Like, I think that there's always going to be extremists on each side of this puzzle. I think that's always important to remember, kind of ironically dealing with this time of year, that this is a thing that is out there. But I would say, here's my opinion. A majority of the people that were in the stadium, I guess, cheering or celebrating at this moment, I cannot speak definitively to some people who were not happy that he was hurt. I cannot say that factually. But what I think the large majority of this is fans who are upset about all of this situation, the entire situation from the time Watson has arrived in Cleveland to this season, like getting as close to this game as we possibly can, about how he is still the starting quarterback and we feel like we're being lied to our face, et cetera, et cetera. There's like a culmination effect here of like 25 years of issues, this guy's situation, the disappointment around the team in the recent memory, and you want something to change. You want something to change. They won't make that change. So the change was he got hurt. And that's after two more quarters of frustrating offense. You get to the point where you're like, all right, something's got to change. People in the stands didn't know he didn't just like twist a toe. They didn't know he ruptured his Achilles until later on into the cart being out there. By the time the cart was out there, I think it had died down at that point. But like, my general theory is, it's not, we don't celebrate injuries. I don't think people, like a vast majority of people, enjoy watching other people get hurt. Like, you don't enjoy that. Like, no one really enjoys watching somebody get really hurt. There are some people, but again, there's outliers on every side of things. But like, to me, it was more a culmination of wanting to see something change, and this is forcing them to do something. And it's like the injury to the quarterback is almost like doing what the franchise seems to want nothing to do with, which is moving off him. So I'm just saying, I don't condone injury cheering. I'm not that person. That's never, I just can't, I'm not wired that way with that stuff. But I also can accept the level of frustration that people have with all of this, having different viewpoints than I do. And at that very moment of thinking, okay, well, now somebody else comes in, not knowing, like, again, people on TV knew that there were in, like, there was a pop and you could see it in the stadium. Nobody knows that severity of injury, because, we're talking guys and we're like, oh, he's done. Like, you could just tell. But that was like 30 seconds into the replay. The people on the field had no idea. You could figure it out like 2-3 minutes later when the cart's out there and stuff. But I'm just saying, I am not a believer of the cheering when somebody gets hurt thing. I understand that. But looking at it through the lens of how other people might be viewing it, I understand where in that moment you're just looking for something to change, and the franchise is like pitting everybody against each other all the time. So to me, it's like funny that the fans are the ones taking all this blame and being everyone's mad at them for how they reacted in the moment. And the people that are at the most root of the issue, their frustration and their belief in all of that, are the ones who get to like scold everybody now. The organization gets to scold everybody. And it's just kind of weird how that happens. I know you guys are not going to agree with me. It's fine. I understand. I want to again reiterate, I'm not pro cheer people getting hurt, but I also have the ability to step back and understand it's less Watson's hurt. Oh yeah. And more like, can we move on from this situation now? Does this situation now move itself away? That's where I think that some of that stuff, and especially people who are drunk there, and it's whatever. It is what it is. But I think that's just like Browns fans. It's just so weird that now Browns fans have to be the ones who are looked so poorly upon when it's the franchise that has put all of these people, including the players in the post-game situation, into these, hey, speak on this scenario thing.
The way I would phrase it is it's frustrating to be having that conversation rather than a conversation about how bad the team has looked through 6-7 games of football, right? That somehow it feels like deflecting. If the main conversation this week in the media, because it generates interest, is whether or not it's right to cheer an injury or how mad the players are that an injury was cheered by a certain segment of the fan base and how people reacted in that moment, that's not a productive conversation. There's not really anything to be learned from that. It's essentially first take, whatever type stuff. And I don't find it particularly interesting beyond that. So I'm happy for anybody else to weigh in, but I also think I would rather talk about, like the injury, how it changes the Browns' outlook for this season, and what else is going on beyond the quarterback that is obviously still holding the team back.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point, Andrew. I think my biggest frustration is, like, to Jake, a little bit of your point. Why is the onus on the fan base to act properly, like at a football game where people have been tailgating since 6:00 in the morning? Like this whole post game thing. What made me frustrated is, and again, nobody here is like, yeah, cheer injuries. Like, I think it's a pretty line in the sand amongst most fans is like they're not going to cheer somebody's season-ending, career-ending injury. What I don't love is expecting the fans, short for fanatics, like these are people that fans are what they are, and like putting the onus on this stadium to everybody behave in the most perfect way when it's the organization that has put the fans in this situation and is sort of deflecting from everything that has culminated to this moment today and what that is. So to me it's just very like the onus is not on the fans to behave in the way that you want to. The onus is on the organization to put a team out there that isn't an embarrassment from week to week. And I don't know what they expected coming out of that 3-game road stretch, and if they thought like the fans were going to be polite and cool. Like these are NFL fans. You see it everywhere. Like people cheered Tim Couch, getting hurt. Like this is something that's already happened. So it's like, that part to me was the most disappointing part, and we can move on. But like for Miles and for Jameis and for these other people to decide, let's turn the narrative on how disappointed we are in the fans is just, to me, is so like, have you guys watched yourselves play football? Are you guys aware of the things that Deshaun is accused? Like to just throw all this stuff out of the window to me is just insane. And it's just so disappointing that like this is the point that we're at, which is basically just worst case scenario of everything coming to a head in the Watson injury. And this is the aftermath. And I don't think it's surprising to anybody who has watched this team that this would be a reaction from some of the fans and that this would be what we're talking about after the game. But I am frustrated that all of a sudden the onus is on these people that pay for tickets and start drinking Bud Lights at 6:00 in the morning, and they should be the ones on their best behavior instead of the organization.
I think Miles went a little too far when he called Deshaun a model citizen throughout his professional career when the league has banned you for 11 games. I'm just saying objectively.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing about all of this and this trade holistically, and then we can probably move on to what the future looks like, is everybody who touched this trade in any capacity as a fan, owner, player, coach, has like a stain on them that is really hard to get off. It's a very like, sorry to go a little highbrow here, but like a Lady Macbeth style like blood spot that can just not wash away. And I think it culminated in that moment. And I think for an organization not to realize that was a distinct possibility. And I know there is a code amongst NFL players to never speak of anybody's actions off the field, but to, kind of wave the morality back in the fans' face who have been thrust in this situation to root for someone who has caused a lot of trauma and a lot of opinions for a lot of people. And that's not saying whether I think that has anything to do with like him being good or bad. But now it's over, and it ended up where I thought it would end up, where we're all still stuck in this terrible Browns mess together. And now it's on us to figure out how to move on, because I think realistically, at least on a human level, I was sad to see Deshaun, a person so emotional. Not sad for him, but just that's maybe the last time he ever plays quarterback in the NFL. I don't think we can assume he'll ever play for the Browns again. And this saga has consumed us. It's consumed this website. It's consumed how the hell we try to cover this team. And so now all of a sudden to just very quickly be pushed into a future that we were hoping for, where we move beyond just kind of this will they or won't they every week. It was a tough thing to see, but I don't think anybody, like, don't let Greg Newsome swearing in his post-game distract from how bad he is covering people. I just will say that, like it's just we should focus on the things here. And I think, Andrew, you've had a great intention of doing so, is like, where do we move from here? What are the things we can do as both a website and how we think about the team to talk about the past for moving forward? Because they're 1-6. These things are undeniable. And like having Stephen A. Smith or Shannon Sharp for the next 2 days talk about how bad the Browns fans are isn't relevant to us, nor is it relevant to how you feel about Deshaun. Whether you like him or hate him, he's now gone for at least a year, maybe forever, and we have to figure out all the other things that are really problematic about this team that have nothing to do with anything happening off the field, and specifically everything that's on the field.
Yeah, we are in a place where there is not a lot of good to talk about because the team looks sort of comprehensively, troubled. I think the defensive performance was, I would say, arguably pretty strong today against a talented offense in Cincinnati, but overall it's not winning football. And so to a certain extent, it's very hard in this situation to look at the bigger picture sometimes because it can feel a little bit overwhelming. I do want to talk specifically about the quarterback situation in terms of what happened after, right? Because as Watson left the game with, at a sort of high-level view, good numbers. He had a very high completion percentage because he was hitting his dump-off reliably, or whatever the other word might be, compulsively maybe. But he was 15 of 17. And as I said at the beginning, was driving the football down the field for the first time all day when the injury occurred. The Browns were able to pay that off in a touchdown through Nick Chubb, which is its own piece of celebration, right? And obviously then it was Dorian Thompson-Robinson's show for the majority. He struggled. There's no doubt about that. He got hurt late, hit a finger, and it's uncertain if and when he will play next. Jameis Winston came in at the end, and he also led a touchdown drive, hitting David Njoku in the back of the end zone. Probably the best throw of the game if we're talking about all three quarterbacks. So, Jake, I don't know how much you can take away from what Dorian Thompson-Robinson did, because it looked to me a lot like the Baltimore game from last year. He was sped up. He was pressing. He was trying to do a lot. He was, I think, at times really trying to force the ball into some windows because they were trailing. And then obviously Winston was playing mop-up duty essentially when the Bengals were playing an extreme prevent defense. So I don't know how much we can take away from those two quarterback performances, but I guess I would just be interested in your thoughts contrasting and comparing their performances with what we have seen from Watson through the first 6.5 games.
Yeah, it's really it's really tough. I know you guys know this, but this felt like Dorian's similar situation to when he unexpectedly had to start week 5 of last year, and it just looked like he was so ill-prepared to handle the moment, handle the situation, handle what they were trying to accomplish. And, I think for Dorian, it got better somewhat as he started to get some more starts and some more weekly prep and involvement in terms of like game planning around his skill set. I don't think that there's any doubt in my mind that he didn't play in practice very much because you just don't have enough time to get your starter enough reps all the time, to let alone get a second or third guy a ton of reps. So there's no doubt that that like the situation itself was not going to be all too conducive for a young player who's sort of like in the third team scenario, who's probably running some scout team stuff for them because they need someone in the scout team throwing the football around. So I understand where Kevin was coming from in the post game, because we were trying to all look at like, well, why is Jameis Winston all of a sudden not the second quarterback? And according to him, they have no intentions of not playing Watson. So if he's the secondary quarterback, the game plan, they said, involved more things they thought Dorian was more effective at. So if they had to plug and play him, he was the better of the two options. I think it's a little bit of quarterback run game. I think it's some more moving the pocket stuff. They wanted to let him use his legs. And that can make sense to me in a vacuum, right? I just don't know how well prepared. And again, how well prepared is any backup quarterback in the league who's young, not necessarily the veterans. I think Jameis is a good example of this because he comes off the bench, not even expecting to get a chance to play, period. And he was fine, right? He throws some throws. Like, that's the stuff about Jameis, is he's going to throw it into throws situations where you're like, that is a ridiculous throw. And then he's going to throw somewhere you're like, I don't think he saw that they had 11 players on the field. Like, that stuff is going to happen with Jameis. His history is his history. And some of those throws are welcome. You guys would agree with me. Like, covered in the NFL, you got to throw it anyway. You got to try to put it in a place where your guy can uncover himself, right? So some of those throws will be welcome, but there will also be some throws that make you like, want to pound your head on the table because like that's an unnecessary turnover. But again, at this rate, I think you guys would agree with me that the offense has felt like, make me feel something, make me feel happy you're chasing something bigger than, checkdowns and like finding a way into 3rd and 8 every drive. Like, it is an extremely frustrating thing. So from a TV view, high end view, Dorian looked overwhelmed. And I thought that was really a disappointment because I had some hope that he could come in and handle that situation a little bit better, take care of the ball a little bit better. And I don't think the first interception was on him. I continue to be befuddled about the development of the wide receivers in the Browns organization, particularly Cedric Tillman, who seems to be going in the wrong direction, given I think a lot of us hoped that it was just like mental processing stuff he needed to be able to get better at. And even the physical stuff hasn't worked out well for him. Again, bigger conversations for the later parts of this week. But, there are a lot of people who really like Watson. I don't think that's a secret, and support him through the thick and the thin. And then today's quarterback performances where they're instantly coming out like, I thought it was all a quarterback problem, can't blame him. Well, I don't think it's fair to judge both of those quarterbacks who came in the second half of that game based on like getting a full week of first team reps and having a game plan centered around what you do well. So if you want people to be patient for Deshaun and give him a ton of opportunities and chance and develop and get used to the play call. And I think you got to kind of return the same favor. It's just this is, again, the organization is pitting us against each other on who to believe and where to go and where to place blame and who's right and who's wrong. But from like a looking at it wide, Jameis was better, right? But again, the situation was like the Bengals felt like that game was in hand for about 15 minutes of football, play, let alone an hour of real time where that I was ironically find myself at the 21-6 mark thinking, well, the Browns score. This is no different than the Jets coming back and, beating the Browns in that ridiculous game from a few years back. It really isn't. The score was the same, but it just felt so lifeless. I think you guys would agree with me.
Joe Flacco's not walking through that door, Jake.
He ain't walking through that door, as they say. They made sure of that. But what we would agree about here is I don't think you can argue Dorian wasn't very good, but I also am not ready to wad Dorian up into a ball and throw him away in the trash can. I think there's a chance to give him a chance and under a little bit more normal circumstances. But if your goal, I'm fascinated. Obviously, you're more interested in what Dorian can be. I at least am interested in giving him a chance to try to do something the rest of the year at times. But if you want to say we're out there to win every ball game, Jameis Winston is going to give you the best chance to do that. That's what I'm like. They're reading what they decide to do there based off of that is going to be at least of moderate interest, 1-6 team level of interest to us. I think there's some interest in that decision, but Dorian, I was expecting him to be a little better. My expectations were not sky high by any stretch of the imagination, but he just is continually kind of putting the ball, throwing into coverage and stuff that it's like, hey man, you can't really play that way. And that stuff is where you're really concerned. Some of the fading out of the pocket where he's running like 16 yards in the backward and then trying to throw it away. There's just some, you guys would agree with me. There's some plays you're like, that doesn't look like a player who fits in.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And I think it leads to a bigger question, Jordan, about how you make this decision. Because Jake put it really well. Like Winston's going to give you the best chance to win, but they're 1-6. So how much do you care about what the Browns' record is at the end of the season? But then I think the flip side of that is if you're also trying to evaluate the wide receivers and the offensive line and you're moving other players in and out, if you're playing a second-year player who doesn't have a ton of experience in the system, does Winston give you a better chance to evaluate your system and the players in it as a whole? I think it's a really interesting question where they go from here. This is presuming, obviously, that DTR is healthy and would be a candidate to start this week. But I'm curious what you think about where it makes the most sense for them to go.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is why, I think there was frustration from a large portion of the fan base and some of us about, the window to start Jameis when the season was not lost. The thing is now it feels like it almost to me is like, well, what's the point of starting Jameis Winston at 1-6? Especially if he's going to play well enough where they are going to be this middle of the road team and you're not getting a high draft pick and you're just kind of in purgatory. So, but then on the flip side, to your point, Andrew and Jake, if DTR, just is not a guy that's going to look competent from week to week, and this thing continues to roll downhill, I do think there is validity in some of these lost seasons that can really take on a pretty terrible life of their own. Not just, I hope they lose so, they can look at a quarterback in the draft or whatever it may be. I do think that stuff rubs off like we've seen in past years with the Browns where the season it spirals out of control and you don't recover from something like that. So I think if it were me, it's like, let's give DTR the first team reps. If there's people, I don't know how the organization feels about him, whether they think they would like to see more of him, or if they're kind of already have their mind made up about him. They don't think he's a future of this team, he's going to be a part of this team. So it's like, I would probably start him, and if they continue to lose games, fine. I just think hopefully it doesn't become something where what it's been this season, where week after week the offense looks so incompetent, and you just see Jerry Jeudy's throwing his helmet. It's like that type of stuff where it's like. You've even got Stefanski making, he's been more demonstrative on the sideline than I think I've ever seen him in years past, in a bad way. He had that, I tweeted it from our Browns from Breakdown account where I think it was just sort of a swing pass to, was it James Prochet, where he gets tackled immediately and Stefanski's on the sideline just doing this. And you're just like, man, you just don't see that from him. So I worry a little bit about the effect this kind of season has on the organization as a whole. and Winston could probably steady that ship a little bit. I just don't think it makes football sense to play him in a season that's already lost when you have a younger guy like DTR in the roster. So that's where I would go. But they, again, they've put themselves in such a difficult position with all of these decisions that they have to make. So I'll be fascinated to see what happens if DTR is healthy.
Yeah, I have seen the sentiment on Twitter from a few different people that of course, DTR became the backup this week. They're 1-5. Who cares? It's all over. For a team that came into the season with the expectations that the Browns had, I really struggle with the idea that they are just going to be cool now going 1-16. Like, that feels like a real dangerous game to play with one of the oldest rosters in the league. Like, things get ugly, out of control, like you said, Jordan, to a point where maybe you're doing lasting damage to people's reputations, people's careers, in a way that is not acceptable. This is not the 2017 Browns where you can go 0-16 and talk about a process. This is a team that was supposed to win games and contend for things, and obviously they haven't done that. So I think that is something that has to be part of this. I really reject the notion that they can just kind of throw results out the window for the remainder of their season.
I would argue, does it even matter? Like, they could easily go 1-16 with Jameis in there. There's nothing about what this team is doing
That's a good
that
point.
would make you think Jameis is going to get them to score over 20 points. Hasn't happened yet. Like, I think you might be able to have your cake and eat it there too. Like, play Jameis, and they'll still probably be terrible unless he's playing tackle.
Yeah, I mean that goes to something that I know you wanted to talk about, Peter, the offensive line, which we got to see it with all three quarterbacks, and it wasn't great. Jordan mentioned the penalties. We're seeing multiple false starts. The illegal shift thing, I know, is not an offensive line thing, but I think it's worth talking about in this area just because it's, to me, is such a symptom of like a scheme gone wrong, where the people just don't seem to know where to be. But yeah, I think talk a little bit more, Peter, about your concerns about the offensive line and how that stacks up with the quarterback decision they have to make, maybe informs the quarterback decision they have to make.
I think Watson going down allows a lot of parts of this team, and some more that we'll talk about with coaching in a little bit too, to kind of lose the smoke screen they had, where now everything you can see plainly, and there's no more hiding behind this kind of massive noise as in the fan base or in the organization. And to me, my biggest concern is, and this is rhetorical, but I'd love to hear if anyone has a thought that's different. Who are the linemen that the Browns have right now that you think are going to be valuable next year and on this team? Right now, I think of Zinter and Michael Dunn. And that's it, I think. And this is the worst line in the league with clearly what might be the worst line coach. I just like they're so old. They're so bad. I guess DeJuan Jones too, but he's so out of shape that it's not a guarantee that he's going to return to his rookie form by any means. And I think that's not something. You get the second or first pick and you're drafting a quarterback. So what? Like, that Jed Wills pick for Andrew Berry might be one of the defining things that we remember about him as a GM. And what a miss that was. I know, Jake, you said he played a little well last week, but man, there was some olaying he was doing pretty hard this week that was really hard to stomach.
Peter, to be fair, he just wanted to catch a pass today, and I think that's and I think no one should be denied that opportunity. So,
and you know what? That's some four-dimensional
quality.
chess, letting your guy pancake the quarterback in hopes of you catching it. That's and to him, credit to him. That's that.
He took advantage of an opportunity that was not there and was illegal.
Harvard of the South. That's what they call Alabama. My general concern, and I think it's more broadly, like, who is good on this line that's going to carry into 25 and beyond? Bitonio is basically on the steep decline. Conklin left today just with like general aches and pains. The center position has been in serious decline. Wyatt Teller is probably going to be a cap casualty here soon, if not this offseason. We went from this being the most important part of who we were and how Nick Chubb became Nick Chubb. And I thought it was kind of apparent today with Chubb coming back. We were just like, he's getting hit a yard behind the line every time. Like, what is he supposed to do? So I think it's more a reflection of I am more terrified about how this team puts together a line for their offense before you even get to the quarterback or the skill positions. And to me, I'm just not sure if I trust anyone in charge who has gotten us to this point, either from a picking players or coaching players perspective, that's going to give me an answer that's going to make me feel comfortable trusting them for the next 1 to 3 years.
I just to piggyback off that, because Jake, I think you've hit on this too. The regression throughout the roster, to me, it's not just obviously the quarterback has been an issue, but like the offensive line, like even Jed, the games where he's bad, he's horrific. DeJuan Jones, who last season it felt like, oh, they may have found something there they can really work with and mold. Again, not in playing shape and is really struggled. You look at the wide receiver. We already mentioned, like, what does Cedric Tillman do?
Elijah Moore was benched for the first 2 series.
Benched, and they don't
disciplinary reasons.
They won't talk about it. So like,
right.
And just Kevin Stefanski's offense that looks like inoperable by anybody right now. So it's like, it's not just, man, the productivity from the quarterback was historically bad, which it was. But it's also like the regression throughout this route. You're looking like Martin Emerson. What's going on there? You know, like these guys that were all just like feeling like last year, like, man, they've got some pieces. They've got some young guys they're really molding. All of those good feelings about a lot of those players, those young guys, you just like that's all sort of gone out the window. And that's hugely concerning because it can't just be that they lost Bill Callahan. It can't just be that, you know, like maybe yes, for some of the younger offensive linemen, sure. But the rest of this roster, everybody's taking steps backwards. And that is, that's a huge issue that I now think with the quarterback change taking place that is now going to become very apparent is the players they have around the quarterback and that line, they're moonwalking backwards and it doesn't seem like it's stopping. So that's a huge concern for me too, is like, why is everybody seemingly regressing?
It's so bad. The line play is so bad. And like you're just and the people that you're holding on to on this line, maybe obviously Batonio for as long as he wants, but like there are no foundation. Like you used to have the guards were foundational pieces. And even Wills, before he kind of told us who he was in full, had flashes that was worth it. And Conklin was still a foundational piece. And I don't think that flips overnight. You know, every year you see the same teams talking about, oh, they spent so much or they drafted so and so. But like maybe this is more a question for Cody, but like I don't know how lines just kind of go from being terrible to awesome quickly. It's just not. That's why they're so expensive and hard to come by. So I just think, you know, whoever's back there in the quarterback position, they can't run the ball. They can't get lined up. They're constantly getting, you know. Although I will say that offsides call on Michael Dunn today was just.
Yeah. It is worth mentioning that the Ron Torbert
was psychotic.
Referee crew is also widely considered the worst referee crew in the
and
the
they
NFL,
were
so.
And they brought their A game today. Let me tell you.
They did not disappoint. They earned every bit of their money. Jake, I'm curious, just from your perspective, this illegal shift thing continuing to come up. I don't like. I know that you've talked about it in film rooms. You've addressed it again and again, but just. You know, in this forum, you know, we've got a bunch of people hanging out with us here, and it was a back-breaking penalty a few times today, including on a very long Dorian scramble to start the third quarter when it felt like, oh, maybe there's a little bit of momentum here. Can you just kind of talk people through what the hell's going on there and why that keeps being a thing?
Yeah, so it's basically as simple as everybody has to be set. So like you can't put somebody in motion and snap the football if everybody hasn't been set ahead of time, a second out from where they normally line up. So you can't, if you like somebody trots out late and they're trying to get lined up, but they don't get set for a second before the person who's going in motion goes in motion. Or if a guy is off the line and the ref tells them to move up or whatever, when they're looking out and putting their hand out, everybody has to be set for a full second for the defense to identify personnel or whatever. That's the origin of the rule. And then you can go in motion and snap on the move. So like you would say, well, sometimes I see multiple guys, whatever, as long as you can move everybody everywhere, as long as obviously not the offensive line, but everybody else, as long as everyone comes set for a full second.
Gotcha.
So if you snap somebody on the move, everybody has to be set. Now, you would ask, how does that happen? It's attention to detail problem. It's not everybody getting lined up quick enough. It's the guy who's going in motion not recognizing somebody near him hasn't been set, or he himself not being set for a full second. Usually, it comes down to blame for two people. It is the coach not getting it right with his guys and having them understand it. And then the quarterback is the one who's in charge of moving that person. Like they give them a hand signal to move, or if you're under center, you give them a foot to tell them to go in motion. It's simple for a quarterback to look around and make sure everybody has been set, see that they're set, and then give him a hand motion to go into his pre-snap movement. So, yeah, I mean, the players need to be aware. If you're the motion guy, like a quick glance at everybody around you to make sure they're set would be nice. But ultimately, it's on the quarterback as the leader of the offense to recognize that your team isn't set. Like a couple times early in the year, I would notice like the quarterback would get up and be looking at the defense and then hand motion the player to move without even looking to see if everybody was set. And some of this is guys like jogging to the line of scrimmage and not as their typical standard getting set quick enough because maybe they're grumpy about a play or bothered or there's a lot of reasons that go into guys not being set. I think if I go back and we like put that video out in the Jaguars game, one play was that they were running a bunch trip set and the wrong guy was on the line of scrimmage. So he moved to get on the line of scrimmage. And before he was set for a full second, the person going in motion around the quarterback, we call that orbit motion, at least where I came from, did not take the time to give him a chance to get set. Another one, Amari just wasn't set up outside wide yet, and the person went in motion. So, I mean, it's just an attention to detail thing. And you're like, well, why do they stop the play? Well, they stop the play because it puts the defense at a disadvantage. Obviously not in those scenarios, but if you abused this rule and everybody came out doing a bunch of wonky like CFL movement or something and you could just snap it with everybody moving, like you could abuse the rule. Like it's obvious that teams are just like having this minor mishap with the rule and it's kind of very ticky-tacky in nature, but if you don't monitor the rule at the baseline, then teams would abuse it. Like we saw, last year they had to ban that lean forward or quote fingers here, cheat motion that the Dolphins and some of the others in the league were trying to employ. And I understand what you're doing. You're always pushing the rules. So if they didn't tighten up this rule, imagine how far people would be doing like 5-man squiggly formations in the backfield, everyone going buck wild, like just snap it. It doesn't matter anymore, right? So I definitely understand the core of the rule, and it's just a matter of like, do you want to pay the attention to the details enough to make sure you're right? Kind of the same with Jedrick Wills being lined up a half step too far in the backfield.
Right.
Or again, Mike Dunn it's a ticky-tack call, probably maybe shouldn't be called, but you got to look around and make sure above reasonable doubt that you're not. And like those are the same. It's no different than false start penalties. It's an attention to detail thing, but they're just less obvious who's to blame and where the blame comes from. But we're 7 weeks in, and today we saw an offensive lineman lined up in the neutral zone. We saw an offensive lineman lined up too far in the backfield. We saw a false start, and we saw illegal shift penalties. That's it. That's your procedural operation for the Cleveland Browns right now, and that's a pretty big reason why they're in the hole they are offensively.
It really segues into.
Gotta get it cleaned up. I'm just saying they got to get it cleaned up.
Oh yeah, yeah. Work harder this week, probably.
Use the dude wipes to clean it up.
I know
offense is sponsored by Dude Wipes. Let's be honest.
Right, we're definitely joking. I mean, I understand that like at the core of this offense, like some guys are just getting beat. They're not good enough, right? They maybe Mike Dunn's not quite good enough. There are other teams getting paid too, right? Like that's a thing. They get paid to beat you. That's going to happen. But what you should never accept as fans are things that you can control as an offense, such as the things that were just laid out there. That's just getting there, doing the thing that's smart. Like I can't, if a defensive tackle bull rushes you into the backfield, all right, man, whatever, you're not good enough. We'll evaluate that at a certain point, but you just costing your team yards consistently by not doing the thing you're supposed to do pre-snap is the stuff that should get people canned or fired, because that's the stuff you can control and you're not controlling it.
And that,
and it's really
Go ahead, Jordan.
I was just going to say, and two, now it's, this is an offensive head coach that prides himself on,
Right.
Since he's been in Cleveland, on being able to design offenses that are easy for his quarterback. And you're seeing a level of pre-snap procedural stuff that I cannot remember ever being at this level, as bad as it is. And so it's like, if we're not getting the details of the offense right with an offensive head coach, what are we doing? Anyway, sorry, Andrew.
No. I mean, it's a great segue, Jordan, because we're talking about an accomplished offensive mind in the head coach and an accomplished offensive coordinator. Ken Dorsey coordinated some really good offenses in Buffalo, so it's not a question of pedigree. Clearly, there's something else is the matter here, and I think that's the part of this that I wanted to kind of dig into a little bit is. You mentioned it earlier, Jordan. The body language of Kevin Stefanski is the worst it's been in his time in Cleveland. Now, one possible reason for that is that this is the longest losing streak of his career. The last time the Browns lost 5 games in a row was the 0-16 season. I went back and looked that up. Even the Freddie Kitchens year, they avoided a 5-game losing streak. So we're going all the way back to 2017 to find a 5-game losing streak. It's hard in the NFL to lose 5 games in a row because of there's parity and there is that level of pride. And one of the things that Kevin Stefanski has done so well throughout his tenure in Cleveland is bouncing back. The Browns last year, they go to Denver and they go to Los Angeles. They lose 2 games. They go from 7-3 to 7-5, and it's like they are on the cusp of putting their season in jeopardy, and they respond and rattle off a win streak to basically clinch a playoff spot and send them on their way. This team, and I think it's an open question, does not have the same resilience or discipline to clean up these basic mistakes, to do the things necessary to get a win. The Bengals were coming into this game were a 2-4 football team. The Eagles last week did not play well. Their coach was yelling at their own fans afterwards. You go back and talk about the Raiders. You talk about the Giants. This losing streak is mostly authored by teams that, if you're power ranking the NFL right now, come in somewhere between the middle and the bottom, with the exception of the Washington Commanders, the greatest football team on earth. I think it's one of the things that I find most perplexing about this is that we talked about this earlier this week, Jordan. It feels almost inevitable they're going to run into wins at some point, and they can't seem to get out of their own way for 4 consecutive quarters. Jake, you've talked over the past few weeks about maybe Kevin is done, wants out, is so frustrated with this that he doesn't like doing it anymore. It feels to me that that's plausible simply because of the way that he is behaving, because of the way that the team is playing. I can't think of anything that explains this other than there's a level of disinterest in the team being successful that I find totally perplexing for a team that had their preseason expectations.
Yeah, there's the point we've been making is the lack of urgency from everybody, and that talking point doesn't change based on this game. I don't think that's a thing. I mean, we'll see what urgency is there. I think they're still acting like a bunch of people who aren't, afraid of their jobs. And maybe urgency to me is a different urgency to Kevin and the guys that lead the organization. I don't really know, but they're not playing with it. They're not acting like it. They can say, somebody like Nick is going to come back and bring life to the team. It's funny that, you're hearing the players sort of talk about this. The players mentioned it too, and Nick has said the same for himself. It's like, hope the presence of somebody makes things better. Or Miles talking about, hoping his playing through injury helps, light a fire underneath players. I mean, at this point, it just comes down to like making the right play. Like there is no answer. There is no quick fix. There is no throw downfield or catch to be made or sack to be made that gets you 6 wins. Like it's just doing everything right every play and then see where you stand at the end of ball games. But these guys are pressing to me like they're trying to dig out of a hole that they're so deep in the trenches of, and the theory of like to get out of the hole, you got to stop digging. They seem to be unable to stop digging at this point. And What I would say is this. I think Kevin has a great leadership style for a group that is established and ready to take a step toward winning and getting into formulating habits that need to be in place to win or to stay level-headed amongst a wild season. We have not seen Kevin in this scenario where his team is clearly bad to the point of
part,
yeah,
right?
to his credit.
Mayfield season, he's avoided the catastrophe.
Yeah.
And this is exactly my point, Jake. It doesn't seem like he's capable of making this better.
Yeah, my
feels overmatched.
general thing is the leadership style, the way he approaches this, all things come back to the average. We will be okay if we do the right things. I like that style. That's a guy that I prefer to play for back in the day. But in this moment, in this time, when accountability seems to be at an all-time low, when I think guys need to be pushed to a different degree here, I don't know that approach is going to yield some in-season turnaround. I just don't, and that's a grim reality, and it doesn't necessarily mean he should be fired over that issue specifically. But I do know that the piper needs to be paid for seasons that end up 3-2-1 type of wins. Somebody's going to pay for that, and I don't know who it will be. We'll see where that stuff shakes out, but I don't have some faith that they're just going to dig deep inside and pull out 3 of the next 4. I don't have evidence of that for you guys, and I don't know if somebody does and I'm missing it. I'm more than happy to talk about it, but that's where sort of everything sits for me right now with Kevin. I think he's a good coach. I think he's a good coach for a good roster, and I think he can even inspire guys to overachieve at certain times if he gets the right auxiliary things in place. But when they're really down, when things are really against them, and you need to really turn it around in the midst of we've lost 3-4 in a row, he is not able to really do that this year. I think there's obviously evidence he's been able to avoid the back-to-back losses and done some things. I just think in the trenches of this year, I'm not sure that his message is getting through. Is kind of where I would at. I mean, I don't want to do a disservice to the guy who's won 2 Coach of the Year awards, and they have avoided these things. It's largely a lot of the same people involved with the roster and whatnot. But I would just say that there's something gone awry in that message this year. And if your head coach's message is not being received, that trickles down to a whole bunch of other places. And I am just concerned about the long-term ramifications of that sort of scenario we're seeing play out in real time.
If you bet $20 game 1 of this season that the Browns would score under 20 points, and you rolled that bet over every single week to today, you would have $971.
Oh, that's not too bad.
That's almost enough to buy the team, Andrew. Just short.
Yeah, my math skills are not great.
I just think listen, we all love Kevin in this room. We've all said glowing things about him, and I don't think it matters anymore. I think you looking forward at the oldest, most expensive roster that is perpetually undisciplined, and I just don't think I don't think in my mind Kevin is necessarily the person you want showing that he can develop talent and also inspire a culture of accountability. And it sucks, but I don't think him or Andrew Berry are necessarily have done anything. And this is the thing about these decisions. Sometimes you have clarity on the decisions that people make in football years later, and not a good time for anyone in the Haslam organization to go on Wikipedia and look at the drafts that they've had over the last 4 years and kind of how that's affected where the team is now. Because
I just was going to say, to me, sometimes I think about this and we can talk about a million different things, but sometimes it's as simple as they made a bet on Deshaun Watson. That bet has gone as poorly as you could possibly imagine, and they are now paying the consequences for losing that bet. Sometimes it really is as simple as that, because it is a trickle down from that decision that they made, and that decision has gone so terribly wrong that this is now today felt like the culmination of you guys whiffed. You guys whiffed really, really, really badly. It doesn't matter whose decision it was. Doesn't matter who was the final say. you whiffed in a horrific way, and you don't just get to like. There are a few teams in the NFL that get to skip stages, and when you make a bet like this with the amount of money that they did, and you miss, like these are the consequences that you're going to face, and this is what's happening. And yeah.
Was this the first game Vrabel was on the sidelines, by the way? Anyone else?
I don't
didn't
know.
see him on the sidelines.
He was there. I saw him. He was
standing next to Jameis Winston, like whispering things into his ear. So
yeah, they said preseason he wasn't going to be on the sidelines. So there you go. Yeah. Just another thing to keep an eye on here as the season dwindles away from mid-October through the middle of January.
We're gonna have fun though. We got a lot of fun stuff to talk about.
Of course, yeah. There will
how happy
be
Jake is.
Plenty of things.
Yeah, somebody take a screenshot of Jake's lifeless face.
Compare it next to Kevin's from last week, right, on the Zoom.
Yeah. I mean, at the very least, grasping at straws, but it's like at least now you can move on to the next thing.
Hell yeah. Yes.
You know, at least like, okay, we all were in alignment on how we felt about how the quarterback was playing. At least now, like, okay, it's not the way you want anyone to lose their job. I wanted to say that at the beginning. Like severe injuries like that is not the way you'd like to get to the next quarterback. But like now we're here, and at least there's a little bit of a mystery now, rather than being like, boy, we know what we're getting literally every single Sunday. So I at least, if I can grasp at something that gives me any light, it's at least that for the rest of the season.
Yeah, then until the offseason when we all have to have the discussion about this again. And then like it's the meme, it'd actually be kind of like a GIF too, where it's Browns fans excited about 2025, and then it's Watson coming out of the casket as the Undertaker. Because it's looming. That decision is going to hang out and just fester all again, just like last offseason. It'll be the same thing.
It's a really good point though, because between now and then we can evaluate questions about the roster that we want answers to, right? Like who's the best quarterback on the roster, right? And can any of the wide receivers play football? And what does the offensive line look like as they start to learn to block for a different quarterback? Does that change things? And obviously the defense, we didn't talk at all about the defense today. I think the defense overall played pretty well against a Bengals team that has been putting up a lot of points. You got to remember that first touchdown is a kick return. So 14 points against the Bengals is, I think, pretty good work for a day for this defense.
Boy, Bubba Ventrone was just came in here like the second coming of Christ. And I would say I don't know the Bible too well, but I feel like he's not lived up to the billing.
No, I think that's fair. Yeah, I would be fine if he wants to pick his stuff up tomorrow. That would be great. To my point, we will have full analysis of this game and every subsequent Browns game for as long as they continue to play football games on Browns Film Breakdown. You can check out Jake's film reviews. You can check out, I'm sure all of us will have articles about where they go from here, what the rest of this season looks like, and then obviously the offseason that is more and more looming with every day. It's the best place to go for all of your Browns analysis. So please check us out at brownsfilmbreakdown.com. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you to Peter, Jordan, and Jake for being here with me. We appreciate you all hanging out despite the fact that the Browns fall to 1-6 today. We will be back soon with more on your Cleveland Browns football team. Until then, be well and go Browns.